Good evening. I'd like to call the Board of Finance Budget Workshop number 1 to order for today, March 9th, 2017. Call that meeting to order. Traditionally at this meeting we entertain public comment at the front end of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. It has come to our attention that there was some information in the community that we were not going to entertain questions at Monday night's budget hearing. So what I would like to do is change course a little bit, and anyone who would like to ask questions of either the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education, their representatives here this evening, about what's in the budget, this would be the time to do it. And if it's general questions, specific questions, this is your opportunity. There will be some questions, I think, from some of the board members here. Maybe not too many tonight, but anyone wishing to ask questions? Okay, let's move on to the next part. Anyone wishing to make general comments about the budgets that were presented to us the other evening? Going once? Going twice? Sold. We have a shy group tonight. What's going on? Obviously, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education did a great job in making their presentation, so everything is clear. For those in the audience who weren't here or have not seen the website, the website, because the budgets are up on the website, I'd just like to do a little recap before we get into some general discussion here and questions from the board members. The Board of Selectmen presented an operating budget of $28,738,999, which is a $664,742 increase, which on a percentage basis is 2.37%. Debt service has increased to $7,879,034, which represents a 5.67% increase. And as most people probably have heard us say, and I think the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, the significant reason for that increase is this is one of those years where we had a big spike in debt service for the high school, which we voted on now 6 years ago, is it? And was passed overwhelmingly by over 70% of the voters. So if you combine those two budgets, the increase for the Board of Selectmen's operating budget and the debt service is 3.06%. On the Board of Education side, the operating budget as presented, $58,770,136, an increase of $863,345, or on a percentage basis, 1.49%. The combined budgets are $95,388,169, $1,950,908 in additional increases, which represents, on a percentage basis, 2.09%. A couple of things before we get into some of the things that are working against us. A couple of things that were positive this year. We had some grand list growth, about 0.4%, 3.65%, I think, around that number, which in current tax, at the current mill rate, would yield additional revenues of $324,000. This board also made some adjustments to the anticipated expenditures for the senior tax freeze program, which resulted in, for all intents and purposes, an additional $250,000 in tax revenues. And we did that without touching the program itself. It's just the experience, the experience we've had with how much money we've set aside for that has not come close to being reached over the past couple of years. So the good news there is nearly $600,000 in new revenue. The bad news, as presented, and I think most of, unless you don't own a TV or a radio or have read a newspaper, the governor had put out a budget that decimated municipal funding for communities like Guilford. We would have eliminated all of our ECS, education cost sharing monies that the state pays to help us help provide assistance for our education of our children. They made some minor adjustments to a couple of the other intergovernmental transfers. But the other large one was the suggestion that municipalities now pick up a percentage of the teachers' retirement payments on an annualized basis. Currently, the teachers' pensions are funded along the following lines. The state puts in 30% of their salaries. The employees put in 6%. And the state was looking, or not the state, the governor was looking to shift 1/3 of the state's portion of those contributions onto the town. That would have resulted in nearly $2.8 million in expenditures for the town. So at this point, we have a budget, a revenue projection budget put together by the Finance Office and the Board of Selectmen, approved by the Board of Selectmen, that accommodates nowhere near what those cuts would entail. The Board of Selectmen made, in effect, a 20% reduction in the education cost-sharing grant, and the numbers we have in front of us today reflect that 20% reduction in state funding for ECS. So we see some good news and we see some not so good news. This board will have to make a decision on whether or not we agree with that 20% cut in funding on the ECS, and we're going to have to make some determination of if we think anything is going to come of the teachers' retirement sharing. One point I do want to make, and it was echoed, I think, by both the chairman of the Board of Education and our first selectman at the presentation the other night. This is a difficult task to come up with a budget when you don't know what some of your revenue is going to be. So the commitment that was made by my fellow chairs of the first selectman and Mr. Bloss was that we make some accommodations for some cuts. We have to. We have to make some. Reality says we're not going to get what we got from the state, and we'll send that to referendum. However, if it turns out that we have not cut enough in funding from the state side, it is the opinion, I don't know if it's the entire board of selectmen, but I know it's the first selectman's position, and I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to discuss it with your entire board, but I know the chairman of the Board of Education is in favor of not sending out, and repeat, not sending out revised tax bills, that the mill rate would stay where it is. The reason I mention that is the state does not have to come up with a budget until June 5th. That's the end of their legislative session. And if form holds, it'll be June 5th at 11:55 that they finally put a budget out. Far too late for us to do anything with the referendum process that we have here. So if we move forward, we have a budget that gets approved at referendum, and then on July 5th, we find a hole in the revenue, the state revenue. It would be my position, in addition to the first selectman and the chairman of the Board of Education, that we find other resources. We do not send out supplemental tax bills to make up that difference. And again, I think that's going to probably require some kind of action on part of all, at least the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So I'm in agreement with those, and certainly folks can have the opportunity to comment on that throughout the evening. So those are some more detail than some of you might have wanted. There is another component to what has been presented to us, and that is capital projects which would be funded through bonds. And the Board of Education has 4 major projects, or 3 projects, and a 4th category, which is engineering and architectural fees for those projects in the amount of nearly $4 million at 3.963831. And the town has 3 major bond questions on the table for $2,660,000. So, what did I miss?
Pretty thorough.
Okay, we're good? Yep. All right. First off, comments or questions at this point?
Yeah, I have a question. As you know, the ECS, basically it is a substantial cut from the state, $582,000, $583, and most of that money is for salaries and health care. And I was wondering, is the Board of Ed going to basically kick in more money for pensions and to cover the health care because of this short fund, the ECS cut of 20%?
The question was ECS, Educational Cost Sharing Grant. That actually goes to the town, and so it is not reflected in our budget at all. It's not designated for any particular purpose. It's a revenue source that is reflected in the First Selectman's budget or the Board of Selectmen's budget. So we don't have anything. We don't have any control over it, and it's not designated for any particular use.
But as far as the short fall with the salaries and the benefits, what is the Board of Ed doing to make up for that shortfall?
I'm not sure what I'm not sure that I understand about the shortfall.
Well, there's $586,000.
That is an estimated, as I understand it. Mr. Mazza can probably answer this because it's his budget, but it's an estimated reduction in the educational cost sharing grant to the town, which is reflected as a revenue source on the town side of the budget.
That's correct. Peter, that's this thing is not. That is a revenue item coming from the state, which in the governor's budget he's completely eliminated. And what the Board of Selectmen decided to do was to reduce our current allocation from the state by 20%. So we've taken a reduction of $582,000. You might be referring, and Bill's still here, you might be referring to maybe the pension that the governor wants to charge.
Right.
Okay. The boards of eds or the town for the teachers. Maybe that's the confusion.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, and if that's the confusion,
yes,
he's going to answer that.
The question is, should we account as a town, as a Board of Finance, a Board of Education, as the possibility of the governor's proposal that towns pick up a piece of the teacher pension plan? Right now, I think that there is not an anticipation that there is going to be a payment by the town of Guilford toward the teacher pension plan in the 2017-18 fiscal year. And I think that's based on a few different things. One is that I think and I've done a little bit of work on the teacher pension issue just to try to understand it. How did we get here? The teacher pension system was set up by the state of Connecticut 100 years ago, in 1917. Interestingly, and at the time in 1917, there were lots of towns that already had their own teacher pension plans. New Haven had one. New Haven asked specifically to the legislature, leave us alone. We have our own plan. The teachers like it. It helps us recruit. If you want to set up a plan, that's great, but let towns opt out. And the legislature said, no, we're not going to let you do that because we think that there needs to be a uniform teacher pension plan across the state with a defined benefit. 50 years later, when municipal employees were allowed to opt into Social Security, or towns were allowed to opt municipal workers into Social Security, Connecticut decided not to do that. Connecticut made a conscious decision. We are not going to go into the Social Security pool with teacher pensions. Then in 1979, the state of Connecticut, again, the General Assembly, set up what was probably the first attempt to try to fully fund the teacher pension program, which was already underfunded in 1979. So the problem, the governor is right to recognize a problem. But it is a problem that none of us in this room had anything to do with creating. We have been very responsible. I know Mr. Mazza talked about the percentage of funding of the firemen, policemen, the other town employees' pension plans. We're around 90% on all of our plans funded. That's fabulous. That's what the actuaries tell us we ought to do. The governor's right to recognize a problem. He is wrong to say that it should be our problem. And I say this for a couple of different reasons. One is the benefit total that is set in the benefit that is set in the teacher pension plan in the state of Connecticut is not collectively bargained. It is not something that local boards of education have any control over. It's not something that we have any say over. The benefit is purely statutory. It is set by one group and one group only, and that is the General Assembly of the state of Connecticut. It's not something we bargain with our teachers about when we're in a contract. The thought then that the state has had literally decades of poor decision-making with relation to funding the teacher pensions, and then that the costs get shifted to the municipalities who had nothing to do with it, without also a conversation and discussion about how do we fix it permanently going forward. What reforms to the entire package should we be looking at, both in funding, and I think all of your units have gone to a defined benefit plan, so that like a 401 a defined contribution plan, a 401k plan that doesn't get us in this position. The state has refused to do that. I don't understand how there are going to be 18 or 19 state senators and 77, 8 something state representatives who will vote to do this in the absence of some global analysis and potential reform of the entire pension system. It makes no sense. It's a bad idea. And I don't believe that it's going to be that's going to be voted out of the General Assembly. The Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents submitted a position paper to the General Assembly today that said that you need to take a hard look at a reform of the entire teacher pension system, revenue and benefits. And you cannot have the conversation about towns getting involved in this without a more global review. So bottom line is, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think people that are inside the Capitol think it's going to happen. I've talked to several people inside the Capitol. It is a singularly unattractive policy position to say you should pick up the cost of the teacher pensions. But if your question is, what if the General Assembly passes that? Then we're going to have to deal with it. That's the representation that Mr. Mazza and I both made on Tuesday. We would have to deal with it. I think it is exceedingly unlikely because it's a bad policy proposal.
Peter, just if you won't mind, were you also asking, was the Board of Ed going to make a reduction to reflect those losses?
Well, basically, who's going to pick up the pension? The town, or is it coming out of the Board of Ed budget?
Well, that is yet to be determined. It's not case law yet. It's not
Right,
law yet.
but I mean,
It would show up on the Board of Education side as a pension line item.
I would assume that the state would tell us where it has to be. But you've got to remember, this is one person's proposal. It hasn't passed committee. Appropriations hasn't approved or disapproved it yet. So there are a lot of details that would need to be worked out. But again, I think I think that this was a way of highlighting the scope of the problem. To that extent, I think it was effective, positive. All right, but that's the only extent to which I thought to which I think it's a positive. It can't happen. Every municipality in the state of Connecticut has got to vote on a budget before the state has a budget. So we'll see. But I just think it's exceedingly unlikely. ECS, I think, is different. ECS, I could see cuts in ECS. I think that's a much more plausible scenario.
Did that answer it?
yep, thank you.
Good. Anybody else, Mike?
I just wanted to stay on that. Because we received demographic information a while back when this was first released. I think this was February 9th after the governor's proposal. So we're talking about amounts of 2.8 and 2.9 million consecutively. But you're saying it's not this budget that would get hit. It would be the next.
No.
Only because it says fiscal year 17, so we're not getting hit now. We're going to get hit in this
I
budget.
really wish
If
we
we
would use
were.
different language, because we are not going to get hit. We are, it is the governor has proposed doing this. And you know, I know there's some towns that are saying that are adopting budgets as if this is going to happen. I think that's a mistake, because what are you going to do when it doesn't happen? You're going to go back and rehire the teachers that you laid off, or you're going to go back and you know,
Or the reverse.
or the reverse.
Because remember, there are, with the governor's budget, in respect to municipal aid, there are 30 winners, 30 communities in the state that are winners if you look at net. They're going to get more money than they had the previous years. There are 139 communities that get less money from the state as a result of those recommendations.
If they happened.
And as you said, it would be foolish to budget as if all 30 of those are going to get all the money they think they're going to get.
That's true. I mean, that would be as bad a mistake as budgeting, assuming that it's all going to happen. And to be fair for just a second to the members of the General Assembly, I know we're
Punting them.
I think they get this. I think that they get the problem of making big changes to state budgets that impact municipal budgets after the municipalities have adopted their budgets. I truly think that they get that. Would I anticipate some changes in ECS? Yes. I think the town has already anticipated some. The best you can do is estimate what you think and what you hear from the Capitol. I think the Appropriations Committee is supposed to vote out a bill in early April, so we'll at least know that by the time of the referendum. But that's all we're going to know. But the bottom line is that if we are able to get a referendum through, a budget passed, that is going to be the tax rate, regardless of what the state does. We'll deal with it. Because I don't think we're going to be dealing with anywhere close to the scope of the problem that the governor's proposal has set up.
I'm in agreement with you, and I've had conversations with Representative Scanlon and Senator Kennedy, who have given me, they can't say assurances, but they've given me the feeling that it is not going to happen the way the governor has laid it out, and nowhere close.
And just to give a little historical context, this isn't the first time this has happened.
True.
Every governor's budget is effectively a floor on municipal aid, and then the General Assembly, which is made up of representatives from different towns, winds up increasing the aid from. So every governor's budget in the last I don't know how many years, the aid has gone up from the governor's budget.
Great. Good. You want to follow up?
I want to follow up, yeah. Just because what I'm getting at is the hypothetical numbers here are huge. They're huge. This is not that you cut a little bit of capital, we are talking pretty much hypothetically, this is class sizes. This is going right into the heart of...
No question.
Because you can't look at $2.8 and $2.9 million and seriously think that you're going to nickel and dime in all these different categories. This is a major change.
Correct.
That's the point I was really trying to get across. This isn't a couple $100,000. This is...
No, this is major programmatic alterations. No question about that.
Let me put it in real dollars. For this current fiscal year, Guilford will receive, or is anticipated to receive, $4,817,046 in state aid. The governor's budget suggests, by eliminating our ECS, adding some to special education, tinkering with a couple of the other smaller grants, and then requiring the teacher's contribution, it would be an expectation that we would be writing a check to the state of Connecticut for $252,000. So the hit to us is over $5 million as presented by the governor.
Right. I would say it would be rather than
would be. Yeah, it is being presented
because it's important. It is not. You know, I think the perception is that the governor's budget is more real than the governor's budget is, and it's not.
It's not. I agree.
I have a question.
For
Mr. Mazza.
Yes.
I just wanted to pick up on what Mr. Blas said. This morning, the Finance Committee took up HB 7050, which was the teachers.
I listened to it in the
Pension.
background most of the day in my office today.
You got to get a life.
You're right. You're right.
Anyway, I did send written testimony, I think you all got
Yep.
copies of,
Yep.
rejecting, telling them to reject that bill, which is the Council of Small Towns, which we belong to, is very much against that bill. What bothers me is that I didn't hear from CCM.
Yeah.
And CCM tells, every day they tell me what bills are up there. And CCM, what also bothers me, was in favor of the bill that was voted on, wasn't voted on yesterday, was taken off the table in the Senate to extend the referendum dates for all of us.
Right.
So they were more concentrated on extending the referendum dates rather than concentrating on the governor's budget. Now, that bothers me.
Yeah.
So I'm
But
kind of
at the
a little
same
bit more worried about this than some of us are.
Yeah, Joe, I've followed the CCM stuff too. CCM has put some proposals out. There's some alternative budget scenarios.
Correct.
So I think that, my understanding was that was what their focus is they're lobbying to get some of their proposals passed, which includes an increase in the state sales tax and
Right.
dedicating a portion of the state sales tax to municipalities.
Right, but they weren't very aggressive.
Okay, on the extending the deadline.
No, they weren't, but they weren't very aggressive in fighting the teacher's pension
Right.
bill. That
That's the one that
concerns
worries
me.
you.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do,
Okay.
if I may.
Yeah.
So on this ECS topic, which is obviously a significant part of what we're all wrestling with here to get this thing this budget into the right spot. The Board of Selectmen, I'm looking at their proposed changes to the original budget you received, and the virtually $583,000 that was reduced from the revenue, state revenue that you're proposing, 582,904, right? Which together with an earlier cut that actually did take place in this fiscal year, right, comes to 20%. It's exactly 20%. So sort of my first question was going to be, where'd you come up with the 582,904? It was an odd number, but it rounds off to 20%. Right. What's magic about 20% then? I mean, what information do you and the selectmen have that you decided that's the number as opposed to 30% or 27%?
That was in consultation with some of our state reps, which was actually 15% of what we were budgeted for last year. Okay. The 20% resulted from what we were cut this year, which was 171, was the actual cut.
Yeah, no, I understand that,
Okay.
but why the grand total of 27? My sense of this.
That was an arbitrary number that
getting at.
our legislators told us to use.
Okay.
Their guess is as good as mine at that point, okay?
Well, I think you had told me that Representative Candelora said you ought to take another 15%.
That's correct.
And we had already lost 5% in
That's correct.
January
Yeah.
with the more cuts.
Yeah.
So that is where your 20 comes from, I think, right?
Okay, and so it's you were trying to, at this moment in time, we're trying to piece together from the information we're getting from our legislatures, which is the pipeline to this problem. And that's the best guess there, but it's still a guess. So if somebody wanted to be more conservative on that number and say, look, there's another
We could have used
couple
30, we could
100,000.
have used 10, you know? It's the best guess, I guess.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Other questions?
No? Anybody else have other more general questions? Or?
I have a question for the fire chief, if he's here, or Mr. Mazza, perhaps?
Okay, so I keep them up there.
Yeah. You got the same guys?
Yeah, I got a couple.
Okay. Hello again.
I'm here.
At the department meetings, the workshops that the Selectman's Office runs, very helpful, and thank you for all the information you've provided. I appreciate all that. One of the questions that I am curious about, in your budget, you're pushing forward stipends for firefighters and paramedics. It's between the two of them, it's just over $100,000, and it's no change from this year's budget to next year's budget. I'm just sort of curious, over the past 2 years, what the actual numbers are in those lines.
Exact. Those are negotiated in the contract.
Those are fixed numbers,
Right.
and that's exactly what you.
Right.
Oh, so it's contractual. Okay, so that's what we allocate. That's what we're going to spend.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's it for the. Did you have another one?
Oh, I got a couple for you.
Oh, okay.
Well, I figured you're up here, so.
I'm here.
Okay. Now I got to just remember how I wanted to craft them. So the other night, there was some questions about the overtime and the replacement. I have no questions regarding why that is.
Okay.
But there are substantial increases in that. And so could you just explain how you get to those numbers? Because when you look at the numbers, it could look, or it does look, that they're greater and there's a bigger jump than in past years.
In what?
And I'm actually asking you to explain that more for the public than.
The biggest increase is in the call-ins for the additional ambulances, which is also reflective in the approximately $150,000 in income that we did bring in. So my department generates about $950,000, and if you subtract that from the $4 million, we're down under $3 million. So, but the call-ins, which is approximately, last year we budgeted 800 call-ins. We actually did 937 call-ins. This year we're projecting to do 1,020 call-ins. Now, a call-in is for additional ambulances, for additional personnel. Now, if the board remembers the MMA study that was done and requested by this board in 2001, the study recommended that we establish a call-in policy and a call-back policy. Even though we did have one, we do it. And that's the major source of getting the second and third and the fourth ambulance out if needed. And it also keeps the volunteers active, because the volunteers do get compensated by doing ambulance calls. But long and short of it is we do increase revenue, and we have increased revenue, and have been steadily for the last couple of years.
Fantastic segue.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask about that because in the revenue, we've been usually around in the 800 number. And as I was looking back at the historical, actual collected, it was and this is all in thousands, 824,000. Then we had it appears a spike, almost $1 million in 15, 16. And then it was 800, and we're projecting 800, and then it went to 875. So I was wondering about the comfortability of that extra 75,000 in revenue.
Very comfortable. Right now, the projections right now we're over what we said we would do this year.
Okay.
So that's your
The call
projection.
volume, the call volume is increasing, and we've got this phenomenon where back-to-back calls occur, where we already dispatched one unit, and then we get two more calls in the back. We still have to respond as a first responder, and by law we have to arrive on scene within the first 10 minutes with a first responder. We are the primary EMS agency in town, which the board is aware of, and we save a lot of lives. My people save a lot of lives every day, and save a lot of property every day. Matter of fact, we protect the grand list.
Good call. Good reminder.
And I had one final question, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit. Actually, this is maybe more for Mr. Mazza. Well, we'll see how he answers it. Or there were Board of Selectmen revisions, and this would actually go to police as well because there was reductions in the budget. Yours was, I think, 32 was reduced out of yours. I'm just wondering what effect that has of the Board of Selectmen making that reduction of 32, and I think police was in the 70s.
You're talking about expense budget?
Yes.
Okay. I think I mentioned this, Vice Chief. The Board of Selectmen decided that we needed to make some more cuts, and we picked 4 departments: police, fire, Public Works and Engineering, which is one department,
Right.
and Park and Rec. We asked them to make blanketed cuts of 0.5% of their overall budget, and we left it to the department heads. We felt that they know their operation better than we do, so it was up to the chiefs to make those cuts.
I do recall that, thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
We're going to discuss amongst ourselves next. Is that what the...
Yeah. The question, do we want to entertain some discussions about where we think it needs to go? I'd be happy to do so.
I think we should, ideally, I was hoping that we'd delay the referendum. I was hoping for different news on that front. I think it's almost impossible to sit here. I've got 50 things that I could go through and cut out 1,000 here and 10,000 there or 30,000 there and recommend cuts in the budget. I think both the Board of Ed and the town have put together a very good budget, a responsible budget. I think that this overhang from the state is a big one. I personally don't think there's any way they're going to make us pay for the teachers' pension plan from problems that date back a long time. I don't even know how they can legally get away with it, but that's my own opinion. However, I do think they can extract the money from us in numerous other ways, the easiest one being the ECS and the excess cost grant. Ultimately, we're going to have to pay. We can pay locally through our residential property taxes, or we can pay through the state through increased income taxes or increased sales taxes, but ultimately we're going to have to pay, and it's just depends on which sector you're in. If you own an expensive home in town, you're going to pay it through your real estate taxes. If you earn a high income, you're going to pay it through your income taxes, and if you consume a lot of goods, you're going to pay it through your VAT tax or sales tax. To me, the $2.7 million, the ECS number, I think we're down to 2.3, and I think we've budgeted close to $1 million for the excess cost grant. I personally think it's optimistic. With regard to the policy that you and Joe and Bill have stated, I concur that I'm not in favor of sending out supplemental tax bills. But then the question becomes, in the event that happens, are we planning on using the rainy day fund that we have? And it would take a big chunk out of the rainy day fund, and everybody needs to know that that is a very real possibility. An alternative to that would be to lower our expectations from the state, in essence increasing the mill rate now, preserving the rainy day fund that some people are in favor of and some people are not in favor of, but there's a very real chance, in my opinion, that we could wipe out a significant portion of that fund in one fell swoop. Should we not get the ECS money, there's a chance. I think we budget 70% on the excess cost grant. There's a very real chance, I believe, that could be 0 to 50. In fact, that's been written up in some things that I've been reading. So for me, it's difficult to go through and say, I think we should cut this and cut that when we really don't. In a perfect world, if I knew we were getting all this state money, I'd probably say, fine, everything looks great. But at the end of the day, if you look back 10 years ago, our tax raise was $58 million, I believe was the number back in 2006, and now we're looking at, what is this one, 89 million? I think we're close to 89 million we're trying to get in tax revenue. So there are a lot of places. One place that comes to mind is interest. I see we have budgeted $20,000 or $40,000 in interest income for the year. If we take in $44 million twice during the year, once in July and once in January, and you smooth that out, that implies that we have half of that is 3 months. We have $22 million in the bank at any one time. We're earning 10 or 15 basis points on the money. Is there really no way we can crank that up to a couple of $100,000 in interest, especially with the spike in interest rates we've seen? So I think there are, I just have questions on lots of little pieces. I don't know whether it's, you can run with it the way it is, but the big decision that has to be made is what we're going to budget with the $3 million, because people are going to vote differently at the referendum, I believe. If I knew that we were going to be short by $3 or $4 million on our revenue assumption, meaning our taxes are $3 or $4 million higher, then there are people out there that are going to want to see $3 or $4 million in cuts to accommodate that, or $1 million in cuts. If we know we're getting that money, a 60 basis point increase in the mill rate, it probably doesn't bother a lot of people, but if it's 1.6, then, put us over 30, then people might think differently. So I don't know how you can go to referendum without more granularity than we currently have.
I share your frustration with it. I'm not sure that we have much of a choice, though. Even if the state were to pass regulation that said you don't have to go to referendum until after the budget has been established. And I think, as I said, if the legislature holds true to form, we won't know until June 5th. My assumption is whatever laws they pass would say you don't have to post it, you don't have to have a town meeting. The ability to go to a referendum within a week or 2 weeks time frame, we would still have to make some deliberations. So I'm not, I agree
Legally, with the noticing that required, it would be difficult,
it
I
would
know.
be very difficult to do. So quite honestly, I'm not sure we're going to be in any better place if we wait until June 5th to do what we're doing right now. Because with all the notifications, it takes 2 weeks, at minimum 2 weeks from the time we have the town meeting, the annual budget meeting, so we'd be looking at the end of June. Again, unless the state's law said something different that you could forego the posting, but I'm not sure that makes an awful lot of sense for people who, we're going to, sort of like what they're doing in Congress here, vote on something you don't know anything about. It's.
And another thing with regard to the ECS, it's my understanding that based on the formula which is no longer used, but which used to be in place, we have received historically more money than we would have received had they adhered, whoever they are, had they adhered to the original formula. I think that the town has done well. So to me, that makes it easier for cuts to come our way. So I think my general opinion is we should reduce our expectations of revenue from the state, and we should try to find $400,000 or $500,000 in cuts somewhere. That's just off the top of my head.
I tend to agree that, and that was the purpose of my question, of how we came up with this ECS cut, and everybody's trying their best to come up with a figure that makes sense based on what's going to happen in Hartford. And we all been in touch with the legislatures, and we're getting that information. My sense of what the governor has done is it's such an outlier that there's a lot more going on to what that proposal was than a serious expectation that it would happen the way it would happen. I mean, to a certain extent, it's a flare showing, look, this is not just a theoretical crisis that everybody's been talking about for certainly 6-7 years, but as Bill pointed out, probably decades. And just to change the debate, though, let's focus on this one issue. So there's a little bit of, for lack of a better word, just politics going on in Hartford. But also probably a little bit of politics of the governor saying, listen, I'm not going to be the one who says, let's raise the sales tax. I'm going to make the legislature be the one to tell me to raise the sales tax. And, so just that's pure speculation, but I'm looking at trying to understand what the thinking is to get into a number like that. So the thought that we would miss that actually we would, I'm going to not use the word hit to keep Bill from, getting too upset with me. But, the fact that the expectation that we would really lose $5 million in one swoop from the state is so far out of bounds it just doesn't seem likely. And we have the legislatures all working, as everybody said. That said, my feeling is we should be a little more conservative and more aggressive in the cuts. More aggressive in the cuts. I was going to say more conservative in expecting what we would get from the state. And I don't know if 582 is exactly the right number, and I don't know if 20% is, or 24, or 27. There might be some number there, and it could be 5, it could be 3. There's some number that we should expect to lose from the state. More than that is what my initial feeling is as I look at all this, and work to find corresponding, revenue cuts to balance that.
So you like the idea of cutting expenditures to balance any reduction in revenue, as opposed to just increasing the tax call?
As much as possible, yes, depending on, if there was some particular item that fell into line that was just, indispensable, but I would, as much as possible, try and match the two.
Now, one thing I think we could probably do, to the extent we took out a big number from our revenue estimate and made cuts, we could, and then we subsequently were to receive that money from the state, we could earmark that money, I believe, for projects that were cut
we can't.
and use it for the subsequent year.
We're not allowed to spend $1 over what the voters approve.
No. But then in the next year, when it comes up again, we can
Okay.
roll it into the budget next year because we, in essence, were too conservative in our assumptions for this year.
Gotcha, I see.
So any project that we can delay for a year, we could let those departments know that those projects would get moved to the head of the queue in the following year, to the extent we received more than we anticipated we were going to receive.
That's a good point. I want to talk a little bit about the ECS. I've been doing this for far too long because I have data that goes back to 1996. And in terms of what precipitated the governor's dramatic shift here was, particularly with ECS, I recall him saying the most recent court case, which the Attorney General is appealing on education, and it's more than just funding of education. But it was my understanding that the judge found that it wasn't the distribution and allocation of the funds that the state has already earmarked for education. It was whether or not those were enough. He did not quibble with the distribution methodology. And Bill's probably much more familiar with that court case. But I did want to bring something up. In 1996, the state ECS grant accounted for 11.5% of the Board of Education's budget. Today, it accounts for through 2017, it accounts for 4.73%. So we've gone over the last 20, 21 years, they have cut our funding as a percentage of the education budget by over 50%. Had we been funded at the 1996 levels, we should have received in 2017 nearly $6.7 million in ECS money. So that shift has already taken place, that shift away from the wealthier communities to the urban communities has taken place over the past 20 years, all right? And whether you quibble with, it was 11.5% too much for our community in 1996, but it was based on the state formula. So we should be looking at nearly $4 million more in ECS based on where we were and when the original ECS formulas came out. And that's...
I have a question, probably Mr. Bloss is probably the best one to ask it. The state law says that we are not allowed to spend less on education, and I believe that excludes administrative costs, but less on education in any 1 year, so we have to keep it flat going forward. And there are exceptions based on income levels of the town. But the main exception that I'm getting at is that if there is a reduction in state aid, you may reduce your education spending by said reduction in state aid. And my question is, since ECS goes into the town, is a reduction in ECS deemed to be a reduction in state aid for education, in which case you could, in theory, cut your expense to your funding for education?
I'm
or
not
is
sure I
that
know the answer to that. I'm looking at Ms. Trudeau, because we've never...
Is that the minimum education?
Minimum education requirement.
Yeah.
The question hasn't been clarified. So towns are asking that question all over the state, and there is currently legislation that is pending that would either lower the MBR, would give you a one-time exception this year should a budget like the governor's pass, or to eliminate the MBR altogether, the minimum budgetary requirement. All of those are questions that are currently open at this time. We don't know where that's going to land.
I don't mean to imply that I would go after you, the Board of Ed, as opposed to the town.
It's just an open question.
Right. Yeah.
And there actually is Mr. McKenzie, you talked about the possibility of, is it legal to have towns pick up part of the pension? It's an interesting question, actually. There's an argument that, remember, in 2008, the General Assembly bonded to put money into the teacher pension plan. Part of their commitment in that bond package was that, quote, the state, close quote, will pay for the teacher pensions. Is it a violation of the bond conditions to try to have the municipalities pick up a piece of it? I don't know. I'm not a bond lawyer, but it's a question that's been raised, and I think Mr. Federici's right. I think if this was your observation. I think this was a flare that the governor sent up to try to draw some attention to it. To his credit, it worked. I think the consternation of all of us in local government, it may have worked too well because it's really injected a level of uncertainty into the process. I think where it's going to wind up, I would hope, is that we're going to actually take a thoughtful look at this and try to do something other than just look at revenue from the municipalities for this. But we'll see. I'll come to your June meeting and we'll find out what they did.
There's also, I think you know this, Bill, there's also an interesting statute on the books that was passed, I believe, last year, that says municipalities cannot raise their tax rate by more than 2.5%. There are some exclusions to that, including capital, bonded for schools, I think is just for schools, right? So, I think we would fall under that 2.5% anyway. But if you layered on $5 million, there is no way we would, if we pass that along to the voters in the form of, $5 million in additional taxes, there's no way we stay under that 2.5%.
Well, I think if we're going to be settled that
they may lift it.
that's going to go away.
They may lift it, yeah.
It'll be an exception.
That bill that statute is really directed at towns that don't have referenda-style governments, because it's one of the exceptions is unless the voters vote in favor of it. So that the voters always vote on our budget. So it's kind of not really that meaningful to us.
But it's interesting that the state had passed some legislation that suggests we ought to be careful about how we're spending our money.
Well, yeah,
and they're not.
No one should miss the irony in the state of Connecticut telling towns who most of whom have referenda-style budget approval process that this is the rules they should live by. Of course, we can raise your taxes by 8% or spending by 8% without anybody other than the 100 and whatever members of the General Assembly voting on it. So, but in any event, it's I think not going to be that material to us. We're still way below.
Is the MRSA, the $650,000 in MRSA revenue in jeopardy as well? Is that a... So that we have to take out too, then. That's in the other
category.
That's in that other. What's that?
It was already eliminated.
Oh, it has been.
Yeah, it's already been taken out. Yeah. Lou, you had something else? You good?
It's been said before, and we'll say it again Monday. But all this difficulty with state revenue, the hidden ironic silver lining is that they can only squeeze these numbers out of us so many times. I mean, we're down to 6.7% non-tax revenue. And the biggest chunk of that decline from 9 and 10% not that long ago is the decline from the state. I mean, the other local non-tax revenues have rebounded. Maybe not interest so much because, again, that's completely out of the control. Not completely out of the control, but largely a macroeconomic factor. But our building department and our economic development has reacted to a certain extent, but that's balanced by. This is just never going to be a town that has massive commercial development as some other towns have in this area. That's a choice that I think everyone in this community has made, and that's, we can keep working on that, and there's a lot of hard work that goes into making sure we do get solid commercial and light industry, but we're never going to be some of those towns downstate, and as a consequence, the bulk of our revenue comes from individual residential property taxes. So it's been said before, it'll be said again, but this is a moment where that really is highlighted.
It is.
Actually, this is basically a political ploy because, as you know, everyone knows that state of Connecticut is financially in distress, and they can't balance the budget unless they raise taxes. So I guess this is a ploy that Malloy has, that he has a plan to cut the revenue that's going to the towns. And when the towns voted, basically it's rejected. In Hartford, he's going to say, well, I had a plan, but now I'm going to have to raise taxes because my plan fell through.
I think the legislature's going to do that for him.
Sure.
And Ken, I completely agree with you. The state has a $1.7 billion hole in their budget. And you're right. It's either going to come out of local property taxes, sales tax, or income tax, and hopefully a combination of some cuts at the state spending level. But that's exactly the problem. And quite honestly, the state's had some problems for a couple of years. Municipalities have been spared over the last few years. Yeah, we haven't seen increases, but they haven't cut into what we had over time. And as the Secretary of OPM said last year to the hospitals, why do you keep going to tax the hospitals? He says, because that's where the money is. So, and that's probably what has happened here. This is the last place that they think they can go find a place to shift the cost to. So, any further discussion? So Monday.
It seems to me that, I don't want to put words in everybody's mouth, but I think we're in a position where we, rather than go through and say we need, cut 30, cut 40, cut 50, we should come to an agreement on what revenue reduction assumption we think is prudent, and then combine that with, if it's a big number, maybe it'll be too much. Maybe we'll agree that it's too much to ask for in cuts from the two budgets. And if it's a manageable number, then we'll ask for some cuts from each of the budgets. Otherwise it'll be, if it's a big number, we'll ask for some cuts, and we'll have to have a larger increase than this original, than the first projection.
I think that's the basis. And we've got a couple of days and a weekend to think about where we want to do it, and we'll have our two other erstwhile members of the board with us to make that have that discussion. And I think people should come prepared with some numbers to present. I know I'll have some.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have to be more conservative on the revenue, and so I'm in agreement. I find it very difficult to look at cuts on these two budgets. I mean, I have not been on this board as long as Mr. Hoey, Mr. Federici, but this is the lowest I've ever seen them come in. And you've got, every year I take out the debt service because the debt service the last couple of years with the high school has been a challenge. But when you come in well under 2% on both budgets, and we've seen them, how they've been crafted, we've seen what's in them. I find it very difficult to look at any cuts in those with what was presented to us over the past few months. But without a doubt, I think we need to be more conservative on the revenue, which, of course, is going to bring the mill rate up. But that's not out of the fault of the budgets that we've seen presented. So that's just my feeling right now.
Is the onus on us to go through and identify specific line items where we'd like to see cuts, or may we throw it back to
I've always been more comfortable
to
with
crafters to ask for some low-hanging fruit at first, and then
with the Board of Education, we can't stipulate where the cuts come from, and we've traditionally granted the Board of Selectmen. Certainly, we can make suggestions, and I think suggestions are fine, but the Board of Selectmen has usually had the prerogative to go where they think it can most easily come from. Joe.
I can use my prerogative as an ex-officiary.
Yes, you can.
Former member of this board.
Yes, you can.
Board of Education budget is quite low. And I believe that our budget is very reasonable. But I do agree with this board that we've got to be very conservative. And the Board of Selectmen have taken a very conservative approach on the revenue side as well as the expense side. My problem is that I don't want to see services cut, either by the school board or by the Board of Selectmen. But I would rather see that you take a severe cut to the revenue if you're going to do anything, and take all lumps there, then cut services. But like I've always said, we'll work with whatever you give us. But I don't want to sacrifice any services.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Joe, I just want to reiterate, and you've complimented the Board of Education on a good budget. We have to compliment the town. And I'm just going to go back over the last 3 years of budget increases on the operating increases for the town and the Board of Education. This proposed increase for the town is 2.37%. Last year's increase, 0.69%.
Yeah.
The year before, minus 1.84%. Board of Education, 1.49% this year, 1.04%, and 2.49% the previous year. We have been through some very, very good budget seasons relative to operating cost, operating budget increases. Now, 49%, 35%, and 6% increases in debt service. That's where the costs have come.
That's the issue. We're caught in a squeeze
Right.
because of, this is no knock on the high school, we all wanted it.
Right.
But we're caught in a squeeze because we built the high school in the time where the state is in terrible shape. And like we've said before, everything rolls downhill and the state is looking to the town to bail them out. But again, I say, if we're going to cut anything, let's cut our revenue first. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your input.
However, I would add that with what was just said about the state having that, we got in on the high school at just the right time before the reimbursement.
The reimbursements.
Right.
So we would have lost, what,
10 million.
10 million, right?
If the project had been approved 10 days
10 days later.
lost 10 million.
10 million.
And we knew that. It wasn't, oh, wow, we got lucky. We knew that we had to do it then. If we didn't, we were going to be losing money. So to the states, to the positive end of that.
You threw a softball over the heart of the plate for him here.
I got him up here for about at least 5 minutes.
No, that's fine. I'm always just a little.
Take it away.
I'm just a little uncomfortable with talking about increases in debt service because that assumes that the prior level of debt service was the reasonable level, and that's not true. The reason that we had no debt service or very low debt service is because we hadn't built a school in this town since 1971. What Baldwin is 71, I think, and the rest of them. We got a bunch of schools from the 50s. We have one from the 30s. Our debt per capita, even now with the high school, is just about average for towns in the state of Connecticut. And as we saw the slide from the town's finance director, it's going to start to decline in a couple of years. So, yeah, you're right. There is an increase, but that is only against a backdrop of 7 really old schools that have been fully paid for, except for things like roofs and boilers and so forth. So you have to look at the whole picture.
And just, go ahead, Ken.
Debt service, one thing we haven't talked about at all is that the bonding that we're coming up with now is going to increase our budget for the next 20 or 30 years, depending on what we do, by another $400,000 or $500,000 a year right there.
It's in the projection. That was in there.
That was in, I didn't see it. That's in that one that you showed with the slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, glad you did that. Mr. Bloss had asked a question the other day. It was passed along from somebody else, and I think I'll take the opportunity to mention it. What's the impact of the budget as presented to us this evening on a house that has a fair market value of $300,000? We're looking at $130 a year increase, or $11 a month with the budget as it's been presented to us. If your home happens to have a fair market value of $500,000, it's a little bit more. It's $217 or $18 a month. That's the impact of what has been presented. $18 a month.
$18.
Yeah, $217 annually, $18 a month. So those are the terms that we're looking at with it as presented this evening.
Yeah.
So, anything else from the board? No, we're good. Public forum. Anyone want to come up and share their thoughts with us? Name and address for the record, please.
Craig Mullet, 146 Tupelo Lane. I'd just like to echo what the board has said. I think the town and the Board of Education have worked really hard on crafting these budgets. I think they're pretty reasonable given where we stand economically. I've looked through the budget in detail, everything from medical costs, the pensions that the town bears, the costs of building maintenance. All of these things have been very, very carefully scrubbed through. And I'd certainly encourage the Board of Finance to try and stick to this expenditure as is proposed and to do whatever it can to push back on our state representatives to preserve the revenue for the town. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Going once? Going twice? Sold. Thank you. We will be meeting on Monday night, same room, 7:30, at which time we're not going to come out of the room until we have a budget to send a referendum, and we will spend some time on the capital, more on the capital bonding projects in terms of the detail on it, if need be. I know we didn't spend an awful lot of time on that over the last couple of meetings. That meeting on Monday will also be televised or available for viewing on GCTV. We will also have public forum at the beginning of the meeting and public forum at the end of the meeting as well. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Carries. Thank you, guys.